In the gilded cage of London society, they had a name for a woman like her, a relic. At 32, Lady Eleanor Vance was a widow, past the bloom of youth, a beautiful statue to be admired but no longer coveted. The whispers followed her like a shadow in the gas-lit ballrooms, declaring her too old, too settled, too late for the grand passion of a lifetime. They said her story was already written, but they never accounted for him. They never imagined that the Duke of Beaumont, the cold, untouchable aristocrat whom every debutante dreamed of, would see past the whispers and find the fire they all missed. This is the story of how the woman they had written off brought the most powerful man in England to his knees. The year is 1888. London shimmered under the gaslights, a sprawling behemoth of progress and prejudice. For Lady Eleanor Vance, it was a beautiful prison. Tonight, the prison was Lady Danbury's annual spring ball, a pinnacle of the social season where fortunes were made, matches were brokered, and reputations were shredded with the delicate precision of a surgeon's scalpel. At 32, Eleanor was a veteran of these campaigns. She had been married at 18 to the much older and infinitely colder Lord Ashworth. His death 4 years ago had granted her freedom and a comfortable fortune, but it had also firmly placed her on the shelf, a well-preserved artifact in the Museum of the Ton. She was the handsome widow, a title delivered with a half-pitying, half-dismissive smile. She stood near a marble column, a glass of lukewarm champagne in her gloved hand, her gown a tasteful masterpiece of deep amethyst silk that spoke of elegance rather than girlish excitement. From this vantage point, she watched the sea of debutantes in their white and pastel gowns, fluttering their fans and their lashes like a flock of nervous, beautiful birds. They were the future. She knew, was the past. "My dear Eleanor, you look positively statuesque tonight," cooed Lady Finch, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. At her side was her daughter, Annabel Finch, the undisputed diamond of the season. Annabel was 18, with hair the colour of spun gold and eyes the blue of a summer sky. She was everything Eleanor was not, young, innocent, and brimming with potential. "Lady Finch, Annabel, you are too kind," Eleanor replied, her voice a calm, low melody that contrasted with the high-pitched chatter around them. "Nonsense," Lady Finch continued, her eyes sweeping the room. "Though I must confess, it is a brave choice to wear such a mature colour. It sets one apart." The unspoken words hung in the air. "It makes you look your age." Eleanor offered a serene smile. "I have little interest in competing with the spring blossoms, my lady. I prefer the shades of autumn." Before Lady Finch could offer another backhanded compliment, a palpable shift occurred in the ballroom. A hush fell, a collective intake of breath. The crowd parted, not out of courtesy, but out of a mixture of awe and fear. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Beaumont, had arrived. He was a man carved from granite and shadow. At 36, he was impossibly wealthy, politically influential, and devastatingly handsome in a severe, unsmiling way. Dark hair, eyes like chips of flint, and a jaw that looked as if it could cut glass. He was the most eligible bachelor in England, not that he seemed to care. His expression was one of perpetual, weary disdain. They called him the Iron Duke, a man who had not been seen to truly smile since the tragic death of his young fiancée a decade prior. He was here, it was known, for one reason and one reason only: to find a duchess, produce an heir, and secure the Beaumont line. A duty, not a desire. His gaze swept the room with an unnerving intensity, dismissing the hopeful faces turned his way as if they were nothing more than part of the decor. Lady Finch practically pushed her daughter forward. "Your Grace," she simpered. The Duke gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod in their direction, his eyes already moving on. And then they stopped. They found Eleanor. It was not a fleeting glance. For a full 3 seconds, the world seemed to slow. His flint-grey eyes met her calm, violet ones across the crowded room. She saw not the powerful Duke, but a flicker of something she recognized, a profound, soul-deep weariness. He saw not the handsome widow, but a woman of quiet strength, whose gaze held no simpering plea, only a steady, intelligent curiosity. She did not blush or look away. She simply held his gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between two people who understood the loneliness of a gilded cage. Then, just as quickly, the moment was gone. He turned to greet his host, and the ballroom's noise rushed back in. But the whispers had already changed their tune. They were no longer about Eleanor's age, but about the look that had just passed between the forgotten widow and the untouchable Duke. And for the first time in years, Eleanor felt a tremor of something other than resignation. It felt, terrifyingly, like hope. 2 days after the ball, Eleanor sought refuge from the city's oppressive churn in the one place she felt truly herself, the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. Here, among the exotic ferns and vibrant orchids of the great glass palm house, she was not Lady Ashworth, the widow. She was Eleanor Vance, a passionate amateur botanist who could lose herself for hours in the intricate language of stamens and petals. She was sketching a particularly stunning Phalaenopsis orchid, its petals a delicate spray of white and magenta, when a shadow fell over her sketchbook. Phalaenopsis amabilis, a deep voice stated, not asked. The moth orchid, a native of Southeast Asia. Its name is derived from the Greek, meaning the moth-like one. Eleanor's hand stilled. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The voice was unmistakable, a low baritone that carried the weight of command even in its quietest timbre. She slowly raised her head, her violet eyes meeting the stormy grey of Duke Alastair Beaumont. He was dressed not in the formal attire of London, but in a tailored riding coat and breeches, looking more like a lord of the manor than a drawing-room aristocrat. He stood alone, without the usual retinue of sycophants. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "I am surprised to find you so far from the heart of town, and even more surprised to find you so knowledgeable about orchids." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a rare and startling event. "My mother was a keen horticulturalist. She believed flowers had a more honest and interesting vocabulary than most people. It seems you share her sentiment." He gestured to her detailed sketch. "Your work is remarkable. You have an artist's eye and a scientist's precision." This was not the empty flattery of the ballroom. It was a genuine observation, and it disarmed her completely. "It is a passion of mine," she admitted, closing her sketchbook. "A quiet one. It does not fare well in the noise of London society." "No," he agreed, his gaze sweeping over the lush greenery around them. "Things of genuine beauty rarely do." He looked back at her, and the intensity she had seen at the ball returned, clearer now in the bright, humid air of the conservatory. At Lady Danbury's you looked bored. The bluntness of it was shocking. No one spoke to her with such unvarnished truth. Eleanor found herself responding in kind. "And you, Your Grace, looked as though you were facing a firing squad." He actually chuckled, a low, rusty sound, as if the mechanism were long out of use. The sound did strange things to the air around them. "Apt. I often feel the London season is a battlefield of strategic smiles and whispered assassinations. You seem to navigate it with a certain detachment. It is a skill one acquires, she said softly, when one is no longer an active participant in the campaign. The words hung between them, a clear reference to her age and status. He could have offered a polite, meaningless denial. Instead, he took a step closer, his gaze searching her face. Perhaps, he said, his voice dropping lower. The most valuable players are not the soldiers on the front lines, but the strategists who understand the map of the entire board. He looked at the orchid she had been sketching, then back at her. My mother once told me that the phalaenopsis represents refined beauty, quiet strength, and courage. A fitting subject. The compliment was so personal, so specific, it left her breathless. He was not just seeing her, he was reading her. In this quiet, sun-drenched glass house, surrounded by the silent life of the plants she loved, Alistair Beaumont was speaking a language she understood far better than the coded pleasantries of the Tun. They spoke for nearly an hour. They discussed the challenges of cultivating tropical plants in the English climate, the poetry of Byron, the changing political landscape. Eleanor found herself speaking with a freedom she hadn't felt in years. Her intellect sparked, her opinions sought and respected. He listened, truly listened, his head tilted slightly, his flinty eyes softened with genuine interest. He spoke of the pressures of his title, the endless demands on his time, the crushing weight of expectation. For that brief hour, they were not the Iron Duke and the Dowager Lady Ashworth. They were simply Alistair and Eleanor, two people finding an unexpected oasis of understanding. When he finally took his leave, bowing formally over her hand, the brief touch of his gloved fingers sent a jolt through her. "Lady Vance," he said, his gaze holding hers, "you have made my visit to Kew infinitely more rewarding than I could have imagined." As she watched him walk away, his tall frame disappearing among the ferns, Eleanor knew something profound had shifted. The whispers of the Tun seemed distant and foolish. In the quiet language of flowers and shared thoughts, the most powerful man in England had just told her she was seen, and it was more intoxicating than any youthful fantasy of love she had ever dared to dream. The Duke of Beaumont was not a man who did things by halves. When his interest was captured, his focus was absolute, and his interest, it became terrifyingly clear to London society, was now fixed upon Lady Eleanor Vance. The whispers that had begun at the ball now roared into a gale-force storm. It started subtly. A magnificent, impossibly rare magenta phalaenopsis orchid was delivered to Eleanor's Mayfair home, the very species she had been sketching. The card bore only his ducal crest and 2 words, a fitting subject. It was an intimate, direct reference to their conversation, a secret shared in plain sight. Then, at a music hall hosted by the Earl of Winchester, the Duke arrived late, surveyed the room, and made his way directly to Eleanor's side, ignoring the hopeful glances of a dozen younger ladies, including a strategically placed Annabel Finch. He spent 20 minutes discussing the merits of Schubert versus Mozart with Eleanor, his attention so complete that it created an invisible wall around them, a bubble of quiet intimacy in the crowded room. Lady Finch's face was a mask of polite fury. "The Duke has eclectic tastes," she remarked to a nearby baroness, her voice dripping with venom. "He seems to be developing an interest in antiques." The remark was loud enough for Eleanor to hear. It was a poisoned dart, and it found its mark. The old insecurities, the ones she had so carefully walled away, began to prick at her. Was she a fool? A woman of her age, a widow, entertaining the attentions of a man like Beaumont? He was seeking a duchess to bear his children, a young, fertile bride. She was a pleasant diversion, an intellectual curiosity. That had to be it. Her resolve to retreat was shattered by the arrival of a new, more sinister threat. His name was Mr. Caspian Thorn. He was a distant cousin of her late husband, a man with a perpetually greasy smile and resentful eyes. Lord Ashworth had despised him and cut him out of his will entirely, a fact Caspian had never forgiven. He appeared unannounced at her home one afternoon, slinking into her drawing-room like a stray cat. "Eleanor, my dear cousin by marriage," he began, his eyes roaming the elegant room with naked envy. "You have landed on your feet quite nicely. This house, the gowns, the invitations, and now I hear the attentions of a duke." "Mr. Thorn," Eleanor said, her voice ice, "state your business. I am not in the habit of receiving uninvited guests." His smile widened. "My business is one of shared history. I was always fond of dear Arthur," he lied smoothly, referring to her late husband. "I worry for his legacy, for his good name." "Lord Ashworth's name is impeccable." "Is it?" Caspian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You see, I recently came into possession of some of his old correspondence, including a rather passionate letter. Not from you, I'm afraid, but addressed to a certain Captain Fraser of the Royal Hussar. A letter written during the time of your marriage, detailing a secret rendezvous." Eleanor's blood ran cold. It was a lie, a complete and utter fabrication. Her marriage to Arthur had been loveless, but she had been a model of fidelity. She had never known any Captain Fraser. "That is a preposterous lie," she said, her hands clenched in her lap. "Is it?" Caspian taunted, enjoying her distress. "A letter can be very convincing, especially in the hands of the right gossip columnist. Imagine the scandal. The virtuous widow Ashworth. Not so virtuous after all. The great Duke of Beaumont would run for the hills. A man in his position cannot afford to be associated with such sordid affairs." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "Of course, for a small stipend, say £500 a month, I might be persuaded to keep this unfortunate correspondence private. A small price to pay to protect your reputation and your prize." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Eleanor's composure. This was not the petty gossip of the ton. This was a direct threat, a vile attempt at blackmail that could destroy her. The scandal would be catastrophic. Alistair, a man of unimpeachable honour and duty, would have no choice but to distance himself. Caspian Thorn was threatening to burn her small, quiet world to the ground. That evening, an invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock. It was from the Duke of Beaumont, requesting her presence at a small, exclusive house party at his ancestral estate, Beaumont Hall, in the countryside. It was the most significant gesture he had yet made, an invitation into his private world, away from the prying eyes of London. Her first instinct was to refuse, to retreat and hide before Caspian Thorn could detonate his bomb. To accept was to risk embroiling the Duke in a scandal of her own. It was selfish, dangerous. But then a spark of defiance flickered to life. Why should she let a wretched creature like Thorn dictate her life? Why should she surrender to the whispers and threats? Alistair had seen her, truly seen her, when no one else had bothered to look. She would not dishonour that by cowering in the shadows. With a steady hand, she penned her reply. She would accept his invitation. She would walk into the heart of the storm. Beaumont Hall was not a house. It was a kingdom, a sprawling masterpiece of stone and slate set amidst 1,000 acres of ancient forest and perfectly manicured parkland. It was imposing, magnificent, and, like its owner, radiated an aura of untouchable power. The house party was an intimate affair, as promised. No more than a dozen guests, a carefully curated collection of political allies, intellectuals and old family friends. Annabel Finch and her mother were conspicuously absent. It was a clear signal to everyone present. This was not a cattle call for a future duchess. This was something else entirely. From the moment Eleanor arrived, Alistair was a different man. Here, on his own land, the rigid formality of London fell away. He was more relaxed, his smiles less rare, his authority less a burden and more a natural extension of his being. He was the host, attentive and charming, but his focus was undeniably on her. He took her on a tour of the famous Beaumont Library, a 2-story cathedral of books with a scent of old leather and beeswax. He didn't just show her the collection. He pulled down a first-edition volume of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, his fingers brushing hers as he handed it to her. "I remembered you mentioned her," he said simply. In the vast, sunlit orangery, he pointed out a breed of rose his mother had cultivated, the Eleonora, a deep, velvety amethyst color. The coincidence of the name and the shade, so close to the gown she had worn the night they met, was not lost on either of them. It was another piece of his private language, a word meant only for her. The other guests watched with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. They saw their formidable, aloof duke utterly captivated. They saw the way his eyes followed her across the dining room, the way he leaned in to hear her speak, the way he seemed to shield her from any potential awkwardness. Eleanor, in turn, began to let her own walls crumble. In the safety of Beaumont Hall, she felt herself unfurl like a flower in the sun. She laughed freely during a game of croquet, her wit sharp and playful. She spoke passionately about art and politics at the dinner table, her opinions holding their own against cabinet ministers and celebrated thinkers. She was not the demure widow. She was Eleanor, a woman of substance and fire. The turning point came on the 3rd evening. A summer storm had rolled in, trapping the guests indoors. A fire roared in the grand hearth of the drawing room, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Alistair found her standing by a tall window, watching the rain lash against the glass. "A penny for your thoughts, Lady Vance," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "I was just thinking that storms can be beautiful," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "All that power and fury. It's honest in a way. It doesn't hide what it is. Unlike London society," he finished for her. He stood closer now, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. The air between them crackled with an energy far more potent than the storm outside. "Eleanor," he said, his voice husky. "Here, away from all of that. I feel I can breathe for the first time in years." "I know the feeling," she confessed, her gaze locked on his. His eyes, the color of the storm clouds, searched her face. They held a question, a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. He slowly raised his hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment, before gently tucking a stray curl of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, a lightning strike that traveled straight to her soul. He leaned in, his intent clear. The world narrowed to the space between their lips, the scent of rain and old books, the roaring fire and the frantic beating of her own heart. This was it, the moment she had simultaneously dreaded and yearned for. And then the drawing-room doors creaked open. The spell was broken. It was one of the other guests, Lord Harrington, looking for a book. Alistair straightened up instantly, his ducal mask of cool indifference snapping back into place. But the flush on his high cheekbones and the fire in his eyes betrayed him. The interruption, however, was a chilling reminder of the world outside this fortress. It brought the threat of Caspian Thorn rushing back into her mind. How could she allow this? How could she let this wonderful, powerful man get any closer when scandal was hovering over her head like a guillotine? The near kiss had not been a release, but a warning. Her quiet life was over. By accepting the Duke's attention, she had stepped into the heart of the storm, and she feared, with a terrible certainty, that it was about to break. The morning after the storm, the atmosphere at Beaumont Hall was thick with unspoken tension. The near kiss had changed everything. Every glance between Alistair and Eleanor was charged with a new, dangerous intimacy. The other guests, astute observers of social currents, felt it too. They spoke in hushed tones, their speculation buzzing just beneath the surface of polite conversation. Eleanor felt as though she were walking on a wire. The joy and freedom she had felt were now tinged with a deep, gnawing anxiety. The threat of Caspian Thorn felt more real than ever. She had to tell Alistair. She had to confess the sordid truth of the blackmail plot before he heard it from a more poisonous source. But how? How could she look at this man who had treated her with such profound respect and admit that she was entangled in a scandal that could tarnish his pristine name? Her opportunity, or rather her doom, arrived that afternoon. Alistair had organized a tour of the estate's famous art gallery, a long, magnificent hall filled with masterpieces collected by generations of Beaumonts. As the party moved through the gallery, admiring a Gainsborough here, a Turner there, Eleanor felt a chilling presence behind her. It was Caspian Thorn. He must have bribed a servant or simply snuck onto the estate. He looked utterly out of place in his cheap, shiny suit, a smug, predatory grin on his face. He cornered her in a small alcove, partially hidden by a statue of Diana the Huntress. "Enjoying your holiday with the Duke, cousin?" he hissed, his breath smelling of stale wine. "You look quite at home. I do hope you haven't forgotten our little arrangement." "What are you doing here?" Eleanor whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. "You must leave at once." "I don't think so," he sneered, moving closer. "I'm growing impatient. The whispers about you and His Grace are all over London. Your value is increasing by the day. I believe my silence is now worth £1,000 a month, and a down payment. Today." "You are insane," she breathed, trying to back away, but the cold marble of the statue was at her back. "Am I?" His eyes glittered with malice. "Let's find out." He raised his voice just enough to be heard by the nearby guests. "My dear Eleanor, there's no need to be shy. We are family, after all. I was just telling Lord Harrington how devoted you were to dear Arthur's memory." He was creating a scene. Heads were turning. Alistair, who had been at the far end of the gallery, stopped speaking and turned, his brow furrowing, as he saw Thorn's hand on Eleanor's arm. "But memories can be so tricky," Caspian continued, his voice now a loud, performative lament, "especially when new documents come to light, like this one." From his pocket, he produced a folded, yellowed piece of paper. The forged letter. He brandished it like a trophy. "A letter, my lords and ladies, from a Captain Fraser to his married lover, thanking her for a delightful afternoon while her husband was away on business." And the signature, oh dear, it simply says, "Your Ellie." A collective gasp went through the small crowd. It was a vile, brilliant stroke. Ellie was the intimate name her family used for her. The implication was clear and devastating. All eyes were on Eleanor, a storm of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. Her face was ashen. Her world was collapsing in public. Caspian savoured his moment of triumph. A tragic discovery, I only wished to discuss it with my cousin privately, to protect the family name." Eleanor stood frozen, mute with horror. The whispers she had feared were now a public accusation. It was over. Everything was over. And then Alistair moved. He did not rush. He walked the length of the gallery with a slow, deliberate, and terrifying calm. Every footstep echoed on the marble floor like a hammer blow. The other guests shrank back, parting for him as they had at the ball. His face was a mask of cold fury, his grey eyes not flinty, but burning embers. He stopped directly in front of Caspian Thorne, his sheer height and presence dwarfing the smaller man. He did not even glance at the letter in Thorne's hand. His gaze was fixed on the man's face. "You will remove your hand from Lady Vance," Alistair said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the chilling authority of a judge passing sentence. Thorne, suddenly realizing he had badly misjudged his opponent, snatched his hand back as if burned. Alistair's eyes then moved to Eleanor. For a split second, she saw a flicker of question, of pain. This was the moment of truth. Would he believe the lie? Would duty and reputation win out? He looked at her pale, terrified face, at her eyes brimming with unshed tears, and his expression softened into one of absolute, unwavering certainty. He had made his choice. He turned his attention back to Thorne, who was now sweating profusely. "Mr. Thorne, is it?" the Duke asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I know who you are. A disinherited parasite with a string of debts from Cheapside to Mayfair. You believe this piece of paper gives you power." He plucked the letter from Thorne's trembling fingers and held it up to the light, not even bothering to read it. "This," Alistair announced to the silent watching room, "is a forgery. A clumsy and pathetic attempt at blackmail by a desperate man." He looked Thorne directly in the eye. "You have made two critical errors. The first was underestimating Lady Vance's character. The second was setting foot on my property." With a flick of his wrist, he tore the letter in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like dead leaves. "My steward will see you to the gate," the Duke continued, his voice dropping to an arctic whisper. "By tomorrow morning, every creditor you have will know where to find you. Every club will have blacklisted you. You will find no open doors in London, or indeed, in all of England. You have 5 minutes to leave my estate before I have you thrown out for trespassing. Now get out of my sight." Caspian Thorne's face had gone from smug to terrified to utterly broken. He stammered, turned, and practically fled the gallery. The silence he left behind was profound. The guests stood in stunned admiration. They had just witnessed the full, terrifying power of the Duke of Beaumont, unleashed not for politics or business, but in defense of a woman. Alistair ignored them all. He turned to Eleanor, his expression gentle, his eyes full of a fierce, protective light. He took her arm, his touch firm and reassuring. "Come," he said softly, for her ears only. "Let us leave them to their gossip. You and I have things to discuss." He led her from the gallery, leaving the torn pieces of the lie and the shattered whispers of the ton scattered on the marble floor behind them. Alistair led Eleanor not to a public drawing room, but to his private study. It was a deeply personal space, smelling of leather, wood smoke, and old paper. A large mahogany desk stood before a window, overlooking the rain-washed grounds. This was the heart of his power, the room where decisions that could shape the nation were made. He closed the heavy oak doors behind them, shutting out the rest of the world. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Eleanor stood trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to a wave of shame and exhaustion. Alistair, she began, her voice cracking. I am so sorry. I should have told you. He came to me in London. He threatened. Hush. He came to her, taking both of her hands in his. His were warm and strong, a steady anchor in her swirling emotional tempest. There is nothing for you to be sorry for. You are the victim of a vile and desperate man. The only thing you are guilty of is failing to realize that I would have believed you without question. She looked up at him, tears finally overflowing and tracing paths down her cheeks. How could you be so sure? The scandal, your name. A man in your position cannot be too careful. Damn my position, he said, the words raw with an emotion she had never heard from him before. He raised a hand to gently wipe a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was exquisitely tender. For 10 years, Eleanor, my name and my duty have been my shield and my prison. Since Isabel died, I convinced myself that my heart died with her. I resolved to live a life of logic, of responsibility. Marriage was to be a transaction, a means to secure an heir. Emotion was a liability I could not afford. His confession hung in the air, a stunning admission of the pain he had hidden so well behind his iron facade. I built fortress walls around myself so high, I thought no one could ever scale them, he continued, his voice thick with feeling. And then you walked into my life. You, with your quiet strength, your brilliant mind, and your eyes that see past the Duke and into the man. You did not try to scale my walls, Eleanor. You simply showed me that the world outside my fortress was infinitely more beautiful than the lonely kingdom within it. He took a step closer, framing her face with his hands. His grey eyes, once so cold, now blazed with a fire that warmed her to her very soul. When I saw that creature lay his hands on you, when I saw the fear in your eyes, I did not think of my title or my reputation. All I could think was that I would burn the world to the ground before I allowed anyone to harm you. In that moment I understood. My heart is not dead. It has merely been waiting for you. The air crackled. The world outside, the scandal, the whispers, it all faded into nothing. There was only this room, this man, and his staggering, heartfelt confession. Alistair, she breathed, her own heart aching with a love she had never believed she would feel. I am not a poet, Eleanor, he said, his voice a low, husky whisper. I cannot offer you pretty words. I can only offer you the truth. My pursuit of you was never about passing the time. It was not a diversion. From the moment I first saw you, it felt like a recognition, as if a part of my soul that had been dormant for a decade suddenly woke up. They whisper that you are too old for love. You have taught me that my life hadn't truly begun until I met you. And then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of absolute certainty, of pent-up longing and profound relief. It was the kiss of a man who had finally come home. All the walls between them, all the doubts and fears, crumbled into dust. Eleanor responded with all the passion she had kept locked away for years, her hands moving to his hair, pulling him closer. It was a surrender for them both. He was surrendering his lonely, ordered world. She was surrendering her resignation, her fear of being hurt again. In the heart of the Iron Duke's fortress, they found their freedom in each other. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I will not let them win, Eleanor, he vowed. The gossips, the schemers, the fools who judge a woman's worth by the year of her birth. Their time is over. She looked at him, seeing not just a duke, but a defender, her partner, her love. She knew the battle was not yet over. They would have to return to London and face the fallout. But now, she would not be facing it as the lonely widow. She would be standing beside the man who had just surrendered his heart to her. And together, she knew they were invincible. The return to London was like descending from a sunlit mountain peak into a foggy, venomous swamp. The clean air of Beaumont Hall, filled with honest rain and whispered confessions, was replaced by the city's miasma of coal smoke and insidious gossip. The story of Caspian Thorne's public humiliation had indeed preceded them, but it had twisted and contorted in the telling. In the court of public opinion, where facts were inconvenient and malice was currency, a new narrative had been swiftly authored. Eleanor was no longer just the handsome widow. She was now the scheming widow. She was painted as a desperate, aging woman who had cleverly entrapped the Duke, staging the entire confrontation with her loathsome cousin to force Beaumont's hand through chivalry. The whispers were no longer rustles of silk, but the sharp, cutting sound of knives being sharpened. Invitations to her home dwindled to a trickle, then stopped entirely. When she dared to take her carriage through Hyde Park, she saw the ladies of the ton turn their heads, their faces masks of cold disapproval. She was being socially exiled, frozen out by the very society that had once pitied her. Her only contact with Alistair was a single, hand-delivered note. It did not speak of love or the future. It contained only 3 powerful words: trust me. Alistair. A week before the Beaumont ball, her closest friend, the sharp-witted and fiercely loyal Lady Beatrice Carmichael, came to call. She swept into Eleanor's drawing room, her face grim. "It's worse than I thought, Ellie," she said, forgoing any pleasantries as she pulled off her gloves. "Lady Finch has been on a veritable warpath. She's holding court every afternoon, spinning a tale that would make a novelist blush. According to her, the Duke is mortified. He's a man of honor, she says, who felt compelled to defend you, but now he is looking for the quickest and most respectable exit. She is telling everyone, in that honey-poison voice of hers, to expect an announcement at the ball, an engagement. To Annabel." Eleanor felt a familiar cold dread seep into her bones. "And people believe her?" "They want to believe her," Beatrice corrected gently. "It makes sense to them. It restores the natural order. A powerful duke marries a young, beautiful debutante. A widow of a certain age returns to her quiet, respectable corner. The world keeps turning as it should. Your story with the Duke is a disruption, a fairy tale that feels too improbable for their cynical hearts." Beatrice took Eleanor's hand. "They are all saying you won't dare to show your face at the ball, that you will plead a headache and fade away, making it easy for him." "And what do you think, Beatrice?" Eleanor asked, her voice quiet. Her friend's eyes, usually so full of mirth, were serious. "I think the Duke is a man of formidable character, but I also think that the pressure being exerted upon him is immense. From the Queen's own advisers, from his political allies, they are all telling him to put an end to this unfortunate distraction. I think you are walking into the lion's den, my dear. And I am terrified they will devour you." The night of the Beaumont ball arrived under a sky of bruised velvet. Eleanor stood before the full-length mirror in her bedchamber, examining her reflection. After days of agonized indecision, she had made her choice. She would not hide. She would not cower. Alistair had asked her to trust him, and she would grant him that trust, even if it meant her heart would be publicly shattered. She had chosen her armor with care. Her gown was not the deep amethyst of their first meeting, nor a maidenly white. It was a column of shimmering liquid silver silk that clung to her figure, elegant and regal. It was the color of moonlight, of a finely forged sword, of the twilight that was neither day nor night. Diamonds glittered at her throat and in her dark, upswept hair. She did not look like a debutante, nor did she look like a dowager. She looked like a queen. Beaumont House was a palace of light and sound, 1,000 candles blazing in chandeliers that dripped with crystal. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax, and the low thrum of the orchestra was almost drowned out by the buzzing of the tun. When Eleanor was announced, a wave of silence washed over the grand ballroom. It was an immediate, shocking hush that was more damning than any overt insult. The sea of people parted before her, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, disdain, and a few fleeting glances of pity. She could hear the whispers start up again, sharp and sibilant in the sudden quiet. The audacity. Look at her, dressed like she's on the auction block. Lady Finch says the Duke hasn't seen her since the country. Eleanor held her head high, her expression serene, and walked into the heart of the storm. Her cousin, a brave but nervous young man who had escorted her, quickly deposited her near a pillar and fled for the champagne. She was left alone, an island in a swirling sea of hostility. She saw him then, across the room. Alistair. He was every inch the Iron Duke, resplendent in black evening attire, a diamond pin glittering in his cravat. He was surrounded by a phalanx of important-looking men, cabinet ministers and foreign dignitaries. He was nodding, his face severe and unreadable, as he listened to a portly ambassador. His eyes swept the room once, a cool, impersonal survey of his domain. They passed over her without a flicker of recognition. Her heart plummeted. For the next hour, she endured a unique and exquisite form of torture. No one spoke to her, yet everyone watched her. She was a pariah, a living spectacle. She watched as Alistair moved through the room, the perfect, commanding host. He danced the opening waltz with a princess of a minor German state. He spoke at length with the Prime Minister. And then she saw him approach Lady Finch and Annabel. He bowed. He took Annabel's hand. He led the radiant, blushing girl onto the dance floor for a quadrille. The room let out a collective, satisfied sigh. This was it. The narrative was proving true. Lady Finch's smile was a triumphant, venomous thing. She looked directly at Eleanor from across the room, her eyes glittering with victory. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. Eleanor felt the floor drop out from beneath her. It was over. Beatrice was right. The pressure had been too great. He was a duke before he was a man, and a duke's duty was absolute. The intimacy of his study, the raw confession, the earth-shattering kiss, it must have been a fleeting madness, a moment of weakness he now regretted. She had been a fool to trust, a fool to hope. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, brutal blow to her chest. She could not breathe. She would not stay to watch him announce his engagement to another woman. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her weep. Her dignity was the only thing she had left. With a final, heartbroken glance at the man she loved dancing with the girl he would marry, Eleanor turned. Keeping her back straight and her steps measured, she began to walk towards the grand arched entryway, her silver gown whispering against the marble. She would slip away into the night, back to her quiet, lonely life. It was, she thought, where she belonged. She was almost at the threshold when his voice cut through the noise of the ballroom, sharp and clear as shattering glass. "You are not leaving." She froze, her hand hovering over the doorframe. The music faltered. He had left Annabel Finch standing mid-dance. He had crossed the entire length of the ballroom, in a few long, purposeful strides. He was standing directly behind her. She turned slowly to face him. His face was no longer a ducal mask. It was alight with a fierce, possessive anger that was directed not at her, but at the room, at the world. "Alistair," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Don't, please." "Oh, I will," he said, his voice a low growl of intent. He took her arm, his grip firm but gentle, and began to lead her away from the door. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her mind reeling. "Ending this," he replied. He did not lead her to a private alcove. He did not guide her to a quiet terrace. With his hand firmly on her arm, he led her directly into the dead center of the vast, silent ballroom. The orchestra had fallen completely quiet. Every guest, from the highest-ranking earl to the lowliest baronet, turned to stare. The silence was a living thing, profound and heavy with anticipation. They were on a stage, a spotlight of 1,000 candles shining down on them. Alistair released her arm and turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. He ignored the hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed upon them. He saw only her, and in his gaze she saw the man from the study, the man from the storm. "Eleanor Vance," he began, his voice clear and resonant, a powerful baritone that needed no assistance to fill the cavernous space. "For the past month, this city has been amusing itself with whispers. I have been told what is expected of me. I have been advised on my duties. I have been instructed on who I am and what I must do to secure my name and my line." He paused, his gaze finally leaving hers to sweep over the assembled aristocrats, his eyes missing nothing, his contempt palpable. "These whispers are the language of cowards. They are the currency of the small-minded and the insecure. They are born of a fear of anything that does not fit into their neat, predictable boxes. They whispered that a man of my station needed a young, pliable bride to be a vessel for his legacy. They whispered that a woman of your grace, intellect, and profound wisdom was past her season for a grand love affair. They have been whispering lies, Eleanor, and I have allowed them to continue for far too long, for one purpose only, to expose the vipers in our midst, and to make my own truth ring all the louder in the silence that follows their defeat." His eyes locked back on hers, burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "They were all wrong. They do not understand legacy, and they do not understand love. You have taught me that a man's legacy is not his bloodline, but the integrity he lives by, and the love he gives. You have taught me that true love is not the fleeting, feverish blush of a first season, but the profound, steady fire of a meeting of minds and souls. Their whispers are meaningless noise. My heart speaks only one truth, and it is your name." And then, before Eleanor could draw a breath, before the stunned audience could even process his words, Alistair Beaumont, the Iron Duke, the cold, untouchable pillar of English society, the most powerful and sought-after man in the nation, did the unthinkable. He went down on one knee. A collective, audible gasp swept the room. Men lowered their champagne glasses, their mouths agape. Women's fans stopped fluttering, frozen in mid-air. There, in the center of his own ballroom, before the shocked and scandalized eyes of the entire London ton, he knelt at her feet on the cold marble floor. He looked up at her, his face stripped of all its ducal pride, showing only the raw, beautiful vulnerability of a man completely and utterly in love. From his waistcoat pocket, he produced a velvet box. He opened it to reveal a ring, not just a diamond, but a magnificent sapphire the color of a midnight sky, surrounded by a constellation of smaller diamonds, the historic Beaumont engagement ring, worn by duchesses for 200 years. "Lady Eleanor Vance," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that cracked through his iron control. "They say you are too old for love, but I say my life did not truly begin until the day I met you. They say I need an heir, but I say I need a partner, a friend, my heart, my home. Will you do me the profound and undeserved honor of becoming my wife, my duchess, my everything, for all the days of our lives?" A single perfect tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek, a tear of pure, incredulous joy. The whispers were dead. The gossip was silenced, suffocated by this magnificent, impossible truth. All that was left was this incredible man, kneeling before her, offering her not just his title, but his entire soul. "Yes," she whispered, the word a fragile puff of air. Then, finding her voice, she repeated it for all the world to hear, her tone ringing with the same certainty as his. "Yes, Alistair, with all that I am. Yes." He rose, his face alight with a smile so brilliant it seemed to outshine the chandeliers. He slid the heavy, cold ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And as he did, from the edge of the crowd, a single, decisive sound broke the silence. An elderly, respected dowager marchioness, known for her sharp tongue and sharper wit, began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clap. Another joined in, then another, until the entire ballroom, save for a pale and trembling Lady Finch, erupted into a wave of thunderous applause. Alistair framed her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I told you to trust me," he murmured, for her ears only. "I'm so glad I did," she whispered back. And then he pulled her into a kiss, a deep, searing kiss of promise and triumph, a public declaration that sealed their future in front of the very world that had tried to tear them apart. The legend of the Iron Duke and his silver-clad queen was born, a testament not to the rules of society, but to the revolutionary, timeless power of a love that had not only dared to defy them all, but had gloriously, magnificently won. And so, the story of Lady Eleanor Vance and the Duke of Beaumont became a legend whispered in the very halls that once scorned her. Theirs was a love that proved that the arithmetic of the heart has nothing to do with age, and that true passion doesn't fade. It refines. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the ones that start with youthful fancy, but the ones that bloom later in life, built on a foundation of wisdom, respect, and a courage that dares to defy the world. They didn't just find love. They redefined it, proving that the most powerful man is the one who is not afraid to kneel before the woman he adores. If their story of love against the odds moved you, please show your support. Don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a timeless romance, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the triumph of the human heart. Click the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Thank you for listening.